Hello everyone, my name is Meridian and welcome to my channel. I post DIY, alt fashion, and cosplay videos with little blips about life and mental health. For today's DIY, I'm upcycling a thrifted bag and skirt into a Kingdom Hearts Ita bag. The only thing I had to purchase for this was clear vinyl. Instead of buying new vinyl, I thrifted a clear bag from Goodwill. Everything else used in this DIY are supplies I already had. I started with seam ripping the bag apart and removing all the threads. To remove the wrinkles without damaging the vinyl, I used a steamer. I wasn't sure if it would work, but Google Gemini recommended it over an iron. I think it did a great job at releasing the creases, and there was no shrinking or warping to the vinyl at all. I pack away the leftover vinyl for a future project and keep the single panel I need for the Ita bag window. For the size of the bag, I want to use the plaid fabric from this skirt I thrifted a while back. The brand is Cherokee from the Target Kids section. There's a bleach stain on it, so I tend not to wear it anymore, but I love the plaid pattern still. I'm seam ripping the skirt to use the fabric and ironing it out. I will only need a portion of this for the tote bag. The leftover fabric will be saved for another project. After thinking through what other materials to use, I ended up using the same black crepe fabric I used with the bow tote bag. To give the tote bag more structure, I will be putting foam padding between two layers of the fabric, bonded together with double-sided fusible interfacing. I prepare 4 panels for the back, front, Ita pocket, and pin insert. For the front panel, I draw out some lines to figure out the placement of the vinyl, and some extra lines to account for seam allowance. I also decided on how much of the top part I wanted to have the icon pattern and marked it. This part actually confused me a lot, and I had to think a long time before cutting out the centerpiece. After cutting, I sew the bottom 3 sides of the vinyl to the padded fabric. The top is excess and will overflow towards the top. Thankfully, this turned out correctly and I didn't have to redo it. I snipped the upper corners of the powdered fabric where the seam allowance is behind the vinyl. Then I cut the excess seam allowance of the padded fabric, so the total seam allowance left is 1/4 of an inch. In the bottom 2 rounded corners of the Ita window, I snipped the seam allowance to release the puckering. To hide the seam allowance behind the Ita window, I use 1/2 inch double fold black bias tape. I insert the seam allowance between the bias tape and sew together. Then I fold the bias tape against the padded fabric away from the vinyl so it's hidden and top stitch it down. I then use a wet cloth to remove the fabric chalk lines. I forgot to iron it after that, but that would have gotten rid of the chalk lines completely if I did. Next, I overlock the edges of my front and back panel at my serger and tack the excess threads as always. Back to the plaid fabric, I measure out 1/2 of what I need and cut the long side in half to make the total length. I add an extra inch for seam allowance. I overlock 2 short sides of the fabric, sew the overlock sides together, then overlock the total perimeter, and tack the excess threads as always. I finish the seam off with a top stitch for a professional look. Next, I fuse some of the black crepe fabric together to thicken and stabilize it, but I skipped the foam padding on this part. To make the Kingdom Hearts pattern on it, I start with some shareable patterns I found posted by an artist on Reddit. I'll leave the link in the description, of course. To make sure that the Cricut cuts are clean, I trace out the icons in vector format in Adobe Illustrator. I get picky about icon symmetry, so I use a lot of guides and the reflect tool when I draw them out. You can skip to the next part if you don't want to watch the time-lapse of this section. If anyone's interested in an in-depth video on using different tools inside Adobe Illustrator, let me know. I then space out the icons with some cursed fraction math, and then prepare the vector file in Mirror for cutting. For the pattern itself, I'm using a shimmer gray heat transfer vinyl. I cut out the size needed and place it on a Cricut cutting board. After the Cricut does its magic, I weed the excess vinyl from the artwork. For the back side of the bag, I'm doing a single large crown icon. When both vinyls are ready, I heat press them onto the prepared fabric and back panel at 305 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. After removing the transfer film, I press them again at the same settings. Next, I trim the icon pattern fabric to the exact size for the top side of the bag. And overlock the edges to prevent fraying. Before sewing that pattern on, I trim the excess vinyl and use a 5/8 inch black satin ribbon to cover the top back seam of the Ita bag window. Then I place the pattern fabric face down, sew it to the front of the panel, then fold it up, and top stitch the seam. To sew the sides in, I pin the center of the plaid fabric to the center bottom of the front panel. Then I pin outwards from there. Then I sew it together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I repeat the same method for the back panel. For the Ita bag pocket panel, I want the width from left to right to be exactly the same as the front panel, but the height should be shorter to avoid the top hem of the bag later. After cutting to size and overlocking the Ita pocket panel, I pin it to the front panel. It is about 1/2 inch from the bottom and 2 inches from the top. I sew the left and right sides of the Ita pocket to the front panel. I leave the bottom without a seam. The plaid fabric was a bit too long, but better to be too long than too short. I cut the excess and overlock the top. After turning the bag right side out, I was excited at finally seeing it come together. When starting off, it was an easy project in my head, but actually going through it was more challenging than originally anticipated. To finish the top hem of the bag, I will be using 1-inch single fold black bias tape. I measure out how much I need, then cut and overlock the raw edges. For the strap attachments, I'm using some nylon backpack straps and metal triangle rings. Looping the strap through the ring, I pin them to both sides of the bag. With the right sides facing, I sew the bias tape to the top of the bag with the backpack strap sandwiched in between at the sides. I then fold over the bias tape towards the inside of the bag and top stitch the top and bottom of the bias tape. This finishes the top hem of the bag while sewing in the strap rings at the same time. For the strap, I had a pre-made adjustable backpack strap with lobster clasps, probably from another bag I thrifted a long time ago. Unfortunately, the lobster clasps that it came with are too small for the triangle rings I used. But fortunately, I had some other lobster clasps that do fit. So I seam rip the strap, swap out the lobster clasps, and sew. Almost to the finish line. The last part is to make the Ita Pin Board Insert. The final fabric pad I cut smaller than the bag, but also bigger than the vinyl window. I round the edges so it's easier to pin and sew the double fold bias tape to finish it. I forgot to turn on the camera while sewing the bias tape on, so here's just what it looks like. I insert the pin board and finally it's complete! I really love how the bag turned out, and I'm thinking about making a pattern for it so I don't have to think so hard in the future. Would anyone be interested if I made an Ita tote bag pattern? If there's one improvement I would make if I did this bag again, I would want the sides of the bag where the plaid fabric is to be padded as well. And that's the end of today's video. If you have any questions about the DIY, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to explain in more detail. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!